So this HOA boss literally boots my cabin door off its hinges right as I'm sharing a beer with the state's attorney general. She just stacked 6 felonies in front of the one person in America who could toss her behind bars right then. I'm talking full-on timber shattering, designer stilettos ticking over shattered glass, the whole 9 yards. This lady in a $1,000 blazer, reeking of that aggressive perfume that probably costs more than my truck payment, storms into my grandfather's cabin, yelling about violations and jurisdiction like she owns the place. Zero clue who she just barged in on. Zero clue she's live streaming her own arrest warrant to 3,000 followers. 6 months earlier, I figured Regina was just your standard power-drunk neighbor. Turns out, she was running a $4 million embezzlement racket and I was about to accidentally torch her entire criminal empire. What would you do if some HOA maniac invaded your private property during the most important meeting of your life? Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from today. I guarantee half of you have dealt with these neighborhood dictators before. Let me back up and tell you how this whole nightmare started. 6 months ago, life was pretty damn good. My name is Caleb Morgan. I'm 52. And after 30 years of crawling through muddy trenches, installing power grids across 3 counties, I'd finally earned my retirement. The crown jewel, my grandfather's fishing cabin on Silverwater Lake, 2 acres of pure heaven that old Jack bought back in 1963 for $800. Can you believe that? $800 for lakefront land that's now worth more than most people's houses. This wasn't some fancy McMansion, mind you. We're talking hand-hewn logs, a stone fireplace that Jack built with his own calloused hands, and a screened porch that creaked in all the right places. I'd kept it completely off-grid by choice. Solar panels humming softly on the roof, well water that tasted like childhood memories, and a septic setup that actually worked better than most city systems. The morning mist lifting off the lake each day reminded me why Jack chose this spot. He used to say, "The land picks you, not the other way around." Smart man. He also used to say, "Caleb, when someone wants your land real bad, figure out why, because it's usually worth more than they're letting on." Then she showed up. Regina Vale, though everyone just called her that HOA psycho, rolled into our peaceful lake community like a tornado in designer clothing. 58 years old, fresh from some California subdivision where apparently playing neighborhood dictator was a full-time trade. She drove this pearl-white Escalade with vanity plates that read, Law 1, I kid you not, and wore her HOA president badge on her blazer like it was a sheriff's star. The woman had one mission in life: transform our rustic shoreline into what she called an upscale resort community. But here's what I didn't know then. 3 elderly couples had already sold their cabins to interested buyers within 2 months of her arrival. Funny coincidence, right? Her first act of war came on a Tuesday morning. I'm sitting on Jack's porch drinking coffee and watching a pair of loons teach their chicks to dive when I hear these sharp clicking sounds on my wooden dock. Designer heels. At 7 a.m. on my private property. 10 minutes later, she's taping this official-looking notice to my screen door. Violation citation. Unsightly dock structure damaging community property values. Fine. $500, compliance required within 72 hours or daily penalties will accrue. I had to read it twice. My weathered dock, the same one Jack and I reinforced together when I was 12, was apparently an eyesore threatening the entire neighborhood's real estate market. Being a reasonable guy, I walked over to explain that my property actually predates the HOA by about 40 years. You know what she said to me standing there in my own driveway, hands on her hips like she owned the place? "Everyone on this lake answers to me, sweetie. Ask the Whitakers how well fighting me worked out for them." The Whitakers, my elderly neighbors, who'd mysteriously decided to downsize last month after living here for 23 years. The pieces weren't clicking yet, but something cold settled in my stomach. That's when she started her photography session, circling my cabin like a real estate appraiser, snapping pictures of my solar panels, my garden, even my grandfather's hand-carved porch railings. The stink of her chemical air freshener wafting from that idling SUV made me want to gag. By the end of the week, I had 3 more citations. Each one came with escalating fines. Each one made it crystal clear that Regina Vale had declared war on everything my family had built on this land. I figured I was dealing with your standard power-tripping neighbor. Annoying, sure, but manageable. What I didn't know was that I just painted a target on my back in a game much bigger and more dangerous than petty HOA politics. Jack's words echoed in my head. Find out why they want your land. I was about to find out why, and it would change everything. Regina didn't waste time escalating to the big guns. 3 days after my compliance deadline passed, because seriously I wasn't tearing down Jack's dock for some wannabe dictator, a certified letter arrived that made my coffee taste like ash. Cease and desist. Violation of community waterway regulations. The letterhead read, Harrington, Pike Sloan. One of those fancy law firms where the partners probably charge more per hour than I made in a month. The legal gibberish basically said my dock was illegally extending into community waterway, and I owed $3,000 in retroactive violation fees. Plus, they were threatening to slap a lien on my property if I didn't pay up within 10 days. My first instinct was panic. These people had lawyers. I had a toolbox and a bad attitude. But then I remembered something Jack always drummed into me during those long fishing afternoons. Caleb, when someone's trying to legal talk you out of your land, the real truth is always in the county records. Never trust what they tell you. Go find the actual papers. So I drove down to the county courthouse, that musty basement where all the important stuff gets buried under decades of bureaucratic dust. The clerk, a sweet lady named Martha, who remembered Jack from his fishing tournament days, helped me pull the original property surveys. I'd learned this trick from my union years. Always check the source documents before some suit tries to buffalo you with fancy letterhead. What I found made my blood boil. My grandfather's lot didn't just go to the water's edge. It included 50 feet into the lake. The deed, stamped and official from 1963, was crystal clear. That dock wasn't trespassing on community property. It was sitting smack dab in the middle of my lake. But here's the real kicker. The HOA wasn't established until 1998, 35 years after Jack bought his land. I remembered my old foreman always saying that older properties often have rights newer developments can't touch. Something about grandfathered exemptions that trump any neighborhood association nonsense. Armed with copies of everything, I marched back to my cabin feeling pretty damn proud of myself. That satisfaction lasted exactly until I tried to leave for groceries and found Regina's Escalade parked sideways across my driveway. Not beside it, not near it, directly blocking it like she was conducting some kind of one-woman traffic stop. When I knocked on her window, she rolled it down just enough to talk through the gap. "Oh, Caleb, I'm just reviewing the community parking regulations. This might take a while." The mechanical hum of her idling engine mixed with that sickly sweet air freshener created this surreal bubble of passive-aggressive insanity. Here I was, a grown man who'd built half the county's electrical infrastructure, being held hostage in my own driveway by a suburban socialite with a power complex. But Regina was just getting warmed up. Within a week, she'd organized something called the Lakeside Beautification Committee, which sounds nice until you realize it was basically a hit squad targeting anyone who didn't fit her country club vision. Suddenly, neighbors who'd waved at me for years were crossing the street to avoid eye contact. Her Facebook posts were masterpieces of passive-aggressive warfare, concerned about eyesore properties affecting all our home values. Some people just don't care about the community. #Lakeside Strong. #boost property values. The comment section turned into a feeding frenzy. People I'd known for decades were suddenly experts on property law, parroting Regina's talking points like she was some kind of real estate prophet. 3 of my neighbors actually apologized to me privately. Tom and Susan Morales pulled me aside during my evening walk and confessed that Regina had strongly suggested they complain about my property or face their own citation blitz. Apparently, she'd already targeted old Mr. Peterson for having non-regulation window boxes and threatened the young couple with the baby over their unsightly playground equipment. "She's got something on everyone," Tom whispered, glancing around like Regina might be hiding in the bushes with a camera. "Her husband works up at the state capitol. Connected, political stuff." That hit me like a cold slap. This wasn't just neighborhood drama anymore. This woman had reached beyond our little lake community. That night, I found orange spray paint covering my mailbox. Bright, aggressive strokes that spelled out, "comply or leave." My security camera, solar-powered and hidden behind a pine, caught everything, including Regina's plate as she drove away at 2:30 a.m. When I called the sheriff's office the next morning, Guess who showed up? Deputy Evan Vale, Regina's nephew. He took one look at the vandalism report, shrugged, and said, "Probably just kids. You know how they are." The rough texture of that spray paint under my fingers as I tried to scrub it off felt like sandpaper against my soul. Jack used to say, "Sometimes you need bigger guns for a bigger fight. Time to find some bigger guns." Regina's next move came disguised as civic duty, which somehow made it even more infuriating. She'd figured out that direct confrontation wasn't working, so she decided to weaponize the entire county bureaucracy against me. It started with a polite knock on my door from Building Inspector Dale Morrison, a guy I'd actually worked with on several projects over the years. The awkward look on his face told me everything I needed to know before he even spoke. "Caleb, I'm real sorry about this, but I got a complaint about unpermitted structures on your property. You know, I have to follow up on these things." 3 hours later, Dale had crawled through every inch of my cabin with his clipboard and measuring tape. His conclusion? Everything was not only up to code, but actually exceeded current safety standards. Jack might have been old school, but he built things to last. "Whoever filed this complaint," Dale muttered as he packed up his gear, "either doesn't know what they're talking about or they're just trying to waste everyone's time." The next day brought Environmental Officer Janet Walker, investigating reports of my septic system contaminating the lake ecosystem. Again, perfectly functioning. Better than most new setups, she admitted. Then Fire Marshal Ben Ramirez showed up to examine my solar panels for hazardous wiring. Clean bill of health there, too. Each inspection cost me a day of peace and a chunk of my retirement sanity. But more importantly, each false report created an official paper trail that made me look like a problem property owner. I remembered something my union rep used to warn us about. Bureaucratic harassment was a classic tactic because it looked legitimate on paper, even when it was pure malice. While I was dealing with the inspection parade, Regina was busy playing her media game. She'd managed to get herself interviewed by Channel 9's Community Watch segment, posing as this concerned citizen fighting to protect our family-friendly lake environment. The story was a masterpiece of manipulation. Carefully framed photos making my cabin look like a dilapidated shack, sound bites about safety risks and property values, and her best brave advocate act. What really made my blood boil was seeing her standing on my dock, the one she claimed was illegally trespassing, while she delivered her fake concern to the cameras. My phone buzzed non-stop with angry texts from neighbors who'd seen the piece. Half the lake community now thought I was some kind of environmental menace. But that's where Regina slipped up. She got greedy. My old buddy Jake Morales from the Electricians Union called me after watching the broadcast. "Caleb, that lady's full of it, and everyone knows it. You built half the clean energy infrastructure in this county. Hell, your solar setup is the one I show new apprentices." Within 2 days, Jake had organized a convoy of my former coworkers to inspect my property themselves. When 20 licensed electricians publicly vouch for your work, the hazardous installation story dies quick. That's when my lawyer friend, Chuck Daniels, stopped by for a beer and dropped a bombshell. "You know, Caleb, the Attorney General's office has been investigating HOA corruption cases across the state. Communities are reporting the same harassment patterns you're describing." "What kind of patterns?" I asked, though I already felt the pit forming in my gut. Elderly homeowners getting hit with bogus citations, property values forced down, mystery buyers showing up with cash offers. Ring any bells? It rang every damn bell I had. Chuck explained that these scams usually involved someone with political connections shielding the harassment campaign while properties were flipped for profit. "The AG's looking for witnesses," he continued. "People who can document the abuse and show the pattern. Someone like you." The hum of my fridge seemed unnaturally loud as that truth sank in. Regina wasn't just a power-drunk neighbor. She was part of something much bigger. That night, I started logging everything. Every citation, inspection, and phone call. I also started digging into Regina's background. Her husband, Martin Vale, wasn't some random bureaucrat. He was the state Democratic Party treasurer, connected to zoning boards, development plans, and political favors across multiple counties. The smell of morning coffee mixing with lake air usually calmed me, but now it just reminded me what I stood to lose. This wasn't about HOA fines anymore. It was about whether I'd end up another casualty in someone else's get-rich-quick scheme. Regina's next phase made everything before it look like child's play. She switched to full-scale character assassination. It started with a Facebook post that made my stomach drop. Urgent safety concerns about aggressive behavior from lakefront resident. Please keep your children away from the East Shore area. We'll be filing for protective measures. #lakeside safety #protect our kids. Aggressive behavior. Me, the guy who ran the kids' fishing derby for 15 years. Within hours, it had been shared dozens of times. The comments section exploded into a digital lynch mob, most from fake-looking profiles. Regina wasn't just lying. She was orchestrating a full-on smear campaign. 2 days later, she filed for a restraining order. The petition, a complete fabrication, painted me as an unstable threat to community leaders. Judge Linda Pierce, who knew my family, took one look and dismissed it for lack of evidence. But the damage was done. Now there was an official record connecting my name to threats. The emotional toll started weighing on me. I'd sit on Jack's porch each evening, beer in hand, wondering if this fight was worth it. The old recliner felt less like comfort and more like the weight of legacy on my shoulders. But just when I was near breaking, something changed. The community started pushing back. Retired Judge Bill Carter, who used to fish with Jack in the 70s, showed up with a thermos of coffee and some advice. "Caleb, that woman's counting on you feeling isolated. Don't give her that satisfaction." He explained how campaigns like this usually hid larger crimes. People don't go to these lengths over petty squabbles. There's money involved. Big money. The local VFW Post issued a statement defending me. The Historical Society called my cabin a heritage site. Even the Environmental Board praised my off-grid system. The good people rallied. For the first time in months, I felt the tide turning. The breakthrough came while I was doing the most boring task imaginable, sorting paperwork for my upcoming meeting with the Attorney General's office. Chuck had arranged the introduction, explaining they needed detailed documentation for their statewide HOA corruption probe. I was sitting at Jack's old oak table surrounded by piles of citations, inspection reports, and legal letters when something small caught my eye. One of Regina's violation notices had this tiny footer I'd never bothered to read before. Fines payable to Silverwater Estates Community Improvement Fund, account number 8472991. Community Improvement Fund. It sounded official, but something about it itched at me. Maybe it was 30 years of reading fine print in electrical contracts, but I decided to dig deeper. By now, the county clerk's office was practically my second home, and Martha knew exactly what I was after when I asked about HOA financial records. She pulled up the public filings and spread them across the counter like a deck of cards. "Here's the thing, Caleb," she said, sliding her glasses up her nose. "Homeowner associations have to file annual reports just like any organization. Let me show you what doesn't add up." The numbers were a disaster. Over 2 years, the HOA had collected $280,000 in emergency assessments for lake dock repairs that were never done. Another $150,000 supposedly went to landscaping services provided by Vale Property Maintenance, a business owned by Regina's brother-in-law, incorporated just 3 weeks after she became president. But the real smoking gun was the insurance claims. The HOA had filed for storm damage reimbursement 3 separate times in 18 months. Problem was, I'd lived through every so-called storm, and not one had caused major damage. Martha helped me cross-reference the claims with National Weather Service reports. The dates didn't match. The HOA was claiming storm destruction on clear, sunny days. "Caleb," she whispered, even though the room was empty, "this looks like flat-out fraud." My hands shook as I photocopied every page. The slick paper felt like a weapon. This wasn't harassment anymore, it was organized theft from our entire lake community. The management fees were the final puzzle piece. The HOA had been paying $5,000 a month to something called Clearwater Property Solutions, but when I looked up the registration, the address was a P.O. box 2 blocks from Regina's house. Everything clicked into place. She wasn't just bullying homeowners, she was running a money laundering operation disguised as community leadership. The elderly couples who'd sold their cabins weren't unlucky, they'd been driven out. The fake citations and plummeting property values were part of a plan to flip properties to connected developers at a discount while she pocketed community funds. I thought of the Whitakers, forced out of their home of 20 years, and the other families who'd sold for pennies on the dollar. They hadn't just been manipulated, they'd been robbed twice. Once when they were bullied into selling, and again through the fees they'd paid into her bogus fund. Jack's words echoed like thunder. Follow the money. That night, I turned Jack's old guest room into a war room. Maps of the lake stretched across the walls, showing original boundaries versus current HOA claims. Charts of dates, fines, and financial transfers connected by red string, like something out of a detective show. Every violation, notice, inspection report, and bank trail documented in detail. It wasn't just a defense anymore. It was a case. When the prosecutors from the Attorney General's office, Dana Mitchell and Eric Boyd, arrived the next morning, they didn't waste time. Dana, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, flipped through the files like a detective skimming through evidence. Mr. Morgan, what you've uncovered goes way beyond harassment. This is systemic fraud that could involve multiple counties. Eric nodded, scrolling through spreadsheets on his tablet. We've been tracking similar HOA scams across the region. Same tactics, same structure, different names. Your documentation might be the missing piece that ties them together. Then they brought in the big guns. FBI agent Rebecca Torres, White Collar Crimes Division. Her voice was steady but lethal. The beauty of fraud cases is the paper trail. What you've shown us here is textbook embezzlement, fake invoicing, and money laundering. But we'll need live evidence, witnesses, recordings, proof of ongoing crime. Chuck, meanwhile, had rallied other victims. 17 lakefront families showed up at the VFW hall, sharing stories that all followed the same script: fake violations, legal intimidation, forced sales, and missing HOA funds. Retired accountant Frank Weber volunteered to audit the records and uncovered something huge. The HOA hadn't filed tax returns in 2 years, despite collecting hundreds of thousands in dues. That meant tax evasion on top of fraud. The AG's team spent hours mapping out the strategy. We had evidence, testimony, and motive. But Agent Torres wanted one last thing: to catch Regina in the act. We need her to incriminate herself on camera, she said. That's when Chuck pitched the idea that sealed her fate. The Attorney General's planning to announce new HOA reform laws, right? What if she holds the press event here at Caleb's cabin? Nothing screams poetic justice like announcing homeowner protection at ground zero. Dana grinned. And if Regina's behavior pattern holds, she won't be able to resist showing up. For the next week, my cabin turned into a covert ops zone. Hidden cameras installed under the mantel, inside the light fixtures, even in a fake birdhouse on the porch. Undercover officers stationed around the property. Media quietly notified. Every angle covered. The trap was set, and we didn't need bait, just patience. Regina's compulsive need for control would bring her straight to us. Regina must have sensed the walls closing in because her behavior went from cunning to chaotic almost overnight. It was like watching a cornered predator lash out, all teeth and panic. The first sign came when my solar panels suddenly malfunctioned one Tuesday morning. My system, which had run flawlessly for years, was dead. Error codes flashing, batteries drained. Jake came over to check, and within minutes, he spotted the problem. Connections deliberately loosened. "Caleb, this isn't random," he said, snapping photos. "Someone with electrical knowledge did this on purpose." Jake was right. He'd secretly installed a small motion camera near my electrical hub weeks earlier after the first sign of trouble. 2 nights later, that camera caught Regina herself sneaking onto my property at 3 a.m., screwdriver and wire cutters in hand. The footage was crystal clear. The HOA president, the self-proclaimed guardian of community order, caught on tape committing felony vandalism. But that was just the beginning. The next attack hit closer to home, literally. I came back from town one afternoon to find my old fishing boat drifting across the lake, its anchor chains sliced clean through. Pop's 1978 bass boat, his pride and joy, now scraped and dented from crashing into the rocks. I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears, But the worst came when my septic system backed up 2 days later. The stench was unbearable, chemical and sour, like acid mixed with sewage. When the emergency techs arrived, they found evidence of industrial-strength drain cleaner poured straight into the tank. Someone did this intentionally, the technician said, holding up samples. This isn't vandalism. This is sabotage. The chemical trace alone was enough to warrant a full environmental investigation, and that's exactly what the AG's team wanted: evidence of active criminal behavior. Meanwhile, Regina was ramping up her propaganda machine. Fake social media accounts flooded local groups with posts about my uninhabitable property and dangerous behavior. Bots and trolls echoed her lines word for word. She was trying to create chaos before her empire collapsed. Deputy Evan Vale, her nephew, of course, started parking at the end of my driveway, idling his cruiser like some kind of intimidation tactic. Sometimes he'd stop visitors, claiming to run routine checks. It was psychological warfare, pure and simple. Even worse, she started targeting the people helping me. Jake's electrician license suddenly came under review for safety violations. Bill Carter got slapped with a bogus ethics complaint. The VFW hall faced surprise inspections. It was clear she was trying to break our entire support network. The pressure was relentless, but her desperation was our best weapon. Every move she made was being logged, filmed, and traced. Agent Torres called criminal escalation. The more unhinged Regina became, the tighter her noose grew. Then came her master plan, her final, spectacular implosion. Through her husband's political contacts, Regina learned that I wasn't just meeting with random officials. I was meeting with the state's Attorney General, Patricia Wallace, herself. Instead of retreating, Regina decided to turn it into a media circus. She reached out to an online accountability network known for conspiracy-driven stories, spinning a wild narrative that the government was persecuting her family for political reasons. Within days, articles started circulating. Local HOA leaders silenced by state officials. The comment sections turned rabid, full of strangers swearing they'd stand with Regina. Her plan? Crash my meeting with the AG and livestream the whole thing, framing herself as a victim of political corruption. She set up cameras, notified her followers, and even hired a freelance videographer to capture her heroic moment. What she didn't know was that her phones and messages were under warrant. The AG's team and the FBI were monitoring everything. Agent Torres couldn't stop grinning when she briefed me. She's going to walk right into our hands and broadcast her own arrest. The day of the meeting felt electric. Attorney General Wallace arrived right on schedule, calm as ever, a thermos of coffee in one hand and a binder in the other. "Mr. Morgan," she said, settling into Jack's old recliner, "what you've done here is extraordinary. Your evidence has cracked open a statewide fraud network. What happens next will change property law for good." We were mid-discussion when I heard it, the roar of Regina's Escalade barreling down my driveway. Gravel sprayed like shrapnel. She leapt out with her phone raised, yelling to her crew, "Get the angle, they're inside." The AG's hidden security detail tensed, ready. "Here we go," Agent Torres whispered from her post outside. Regina's voice grew louder as she approached. "This is it, everyone. We're about to expose government corruption in real time." Seconds later, boom, my cabin door burst open, wood splintering across the floor. Regina stormed in, live streaming to thousands. "I demand to know why the Attorney General is secretly meeting with this man," she shouted. Then her face froze. Patricia Wallace calmly stood up, flipping open her badge. "Mrs. Vale," she said in that steady, no-nonsense tone, "I am the Attorney General of this state. You have just committed multiple felonies in my presence, and your confession is being broadcast to thousands of witnesses." The silence that followed was pure cinematic gold. You could almost hear the collective gasp of her audience as the comments started flipping from outrage to disbelief. Then Agent Torres stepped in, flanked by 2 federal agents. "Regina Vale," she said, "you are under arrest for fraud, extortion, witness intimidation, and harassment." The click of the handcuffs echoed like thunder. Regina's phone clattered to the floor, still live streaming as her empire burned down around her. When Sheriff Rodriguez showed up for the transport, half the neighborhood had gathered outside. The same people she'd bullied now watched as she stumbled past my porch in cuffs. Her Escalade, license plate Law 1, was towed away as evidence. "This isn't over," she screamed. "My husband will fix this." But it was over, completely. 3 months later, Judge Harrison sentenced her to 3 years in federal prison and $340,000 in restitution. Her husband, Martin, got 18 months for conspiracy. The HOA was officially dissolved, replaced by a volunteer association. No mandatory fees, no fines, just neighbors helping neighbors. I never expected recognition, but the state saw fit to award me whistleblower compensation, $45,000, which I used to start the Jack Morgan Legacy Fund, providing scholarships to kids going into the trades. Attorney General Wallace introduced new legislation called the Morgan Act, requiring independent financial audits for all HOAs and criminal penalties for harassment-based property manipulation. Now, the lake is peaceful again. The community rebuilt stronger than ever. My cabin, once labeled an eyesore, has been featured in renewable energy magazines. Families are returning, barbecues are back, and the air feels lighter. The Netflix crew finished filming last month. Our story is becoming a documentary called HOA Hell: How One Man Took Down a Criminal Empire. I'm sitting on my porch now, watching the sunset ripple across Silverwater Lake. The loons are calling, the solar panels hum quietly, and the air smells like pine and freedom. Sometimes, the little guy really can win, if he's stubborn enough to fight. So tell me, what would you have done if your HOA turned criminal? Drop a comment below, hit like, and subscribe for more true stories of everyday people taking back what's theirs. Next week, I'll tell you about the city councilman who tried to shut down a veteran's food truck, until the owner's Pentagon buddies decided to pay him a visit.